To be completely real with you guys, I absolutely love the pursuit of knowledge, but more specifically, the pursuit of useless knowledge. And this has very much made its way into facts, and I love learning about random topics, about random different things, and just having that information on the very off chance that I may need it. And this has definitely made its way into Ninjago, and that is why I started this series where I talk about a fact from every single episode of every single season. Because simply put, there are so many facts about Ninjago that not a lot of people know that I think are very cool to understand. So for the last episode, we covered the pilot episodes and the 2011 mini-movies that happened between the pilot and season 1. So today, we are going to continue on with the Rise of the Snakes. And I'm gonna be honest, I was actually a little bit surprised when doing research for this video, because some of the episodes don't really have a lot of facts, so it's a bit strange to put it lightly. But I still have one fact from every single episode that I think is at least mildly interesting. But just like that, let's get into this episode, and we are going to start with episode 1. Now this episode does have a very interesting little inconsistency that is purely down to the US version of the episode, and it does not exist in any other one. At the very start of episode 1, we see Wu walk into the room with a ninja playing a game, but in the US version of this episode, the ninja are playing a game that is identical to the fight scene that they had in the episode The Golden Weapon, and it's just a direct play-by-play with a video game overlaid on it. However, if you were to watch this episode from any other area of the world, mainly Europe and Asia, you will find that it's not the Golden Weapon that the ninja are playing. However, they're playing the actual real-life LEGO Battles Ninjago game that you can play yourself. This has also made its way onto all versions of Netflix Ninjago, and it seems to be the definitive version of what the ninja were playing, which means that you could yourself play the game that the ninja were playing in episode 1, which is a cool little thing. And I'm gonna be perfectly honest, this definitely is the better version of this episode, because simply put, having the Golden Weapon be an actual game in Ninjago makes absolutely no sense. But just like that, we're moving on to episode 2. Now episode 2 surprisingly does not have all too much in the way of facts, but it does have one interesting thing that I'd like to point out. This being that this is actually the episode that they introduce a lot of different aspects of Ninjago that have become staples now. As you can see, this episode was the introduction of Zane's Falcon, the Postman in official capacity, because I know in the last episode I mentioned the Postman having his first appearance in the mini-movies, but this is his first official episodic outing. And the last one, and probably the biggest one, is the fact that this is the first appearance of the Destiny's Bounty. It is literally the episode that introduced us to so many staples of the show that we all know and love. And I'm gonna be honest, it doesn't get enough credit for how much it gave us. But moving on to episode 3, this is potentially my favorite one so far, because this is the only instance of Ninjago where we get a depiction of blood. In this episode, we get to see Ed and Edna get bitten by some of the Serpentine, and as a result they become Serpentine themselves. However, there are certain shots where we actually see a depiction of blood on their arms where the bite wound is. Now this honestly is very interesting because we never get a depiction of blood in any other way, and I'm gonna be honest, I never even knew this until now because I assumed they never would have gone down this route. But there it is, that is blood on his arm. There is also a shot of Edna's arm having blood as well, but unfortunately I couldn't find it for this episode. But it is definitely there, and it is confirmed that both of them had this mark on them. But it's honestly fascinating to think that they fully had a depiction of blood in Ninjago, and it's, I think, the only instance that we see it. But that brings us to episode 4, and this is possibly one of the funniest of the lot, because again, like the previous one, I never noticed this until now. This being the scene where Zane is explaining to the other 3 ninja his dream about the green ninja while they're training. But in this scene, Wu gets angry at the ninja for not paying attention, and each of the 3 ninja depict the 3 wise monkeys. And I never noticed this, and honestly this is such a cool detail that now I can't unsee, because Cole represents hear no evil, Jay represents speak no evil, and Kai represents see no evil. And honestly, This is so cool to see. And Wu himself even replies saying that they look like the shocked monkeys. And that's such a cool detail. Ninjago is so good! But just like that, we are on episode 5. And this is such a small little fact, but it's still a fun one nonetheless. This being that this is the first official appearance of Samurai X. But Samurai X didn't have her official name at this point, so in the credits of this episode, she is credited as the Dark Samurai. And that is so cool to see because it's clearly a placeholder name because they didn't have an ironed out name at this point. But it's cool that they thought of doing the Dark Samurai instead of Samurai X. But honestly, Samurai X is still a better one. But it's still a fun little fact nonetheless. But bringing us to episode 6, we are going to continue with the theme of the facts being to do with Samurai X. But this time, it's to do with something that she does. This being the scene where she uses some sort of magnet in her armor to get the golden weapons back. And she magnetizes them all together into a little bundle. Now I could comment on the fact that all the weapons are together and they should explode at this point, but it's interesting because gold itself is not actually magnetic, so how is she doing this? Now it could simply just be down to a little error or just a little bit of a difference in universes. You could simply just make the argument that the gold of the golden weapons are magnetic when real life gold is not. But if you look at it from a real world standpoint, pure gold is not magnetic. So it's a little interesting detail that we never really got an explanation on. But regardless, it's still a fun little thing to point out, and we never get any other implication of the golden weapons being magnetic. But regardless, it's still a fun one. But moving on. Episode 7 has a very cool little fact because it demonstrates a bit more of a foreshadowing when it comes to Zane. This being that in the Japanese version of this episode, the ninja referred to Zane being underwater for a different stretch of time. In standard versions of this episode, it is noted that Zane was under the water for 10 minutes, which is fairly good to put it simply. However, in the Japanese version, Zane was under the water for 10 hours and 10 minutes. And honestly, I kind of prefer this. It would be a cool little bit of foreshadowing to Zane's true nature, and the ninja just passing it off as just one of Zane's interests and abilities. But honestly, I wish this was kept in on all versions. And honestly, it would have made for a more interesting reveal because it would have tipped people off if they were paying attention. But honestly, I'm so glad with how things went because 10 minutes still gets the same effect. It's just 10 hours sounds more cool. Episode 8 comes in with a fact that also stretches its way out to a previous episode, and that being that the ninja re-referenced their little bet on trying to figure out who the mysterious samurai was. And Kai points out that their bet said that whoever figured out who Samurai X was going to be the Green Ninja, and as soon as Kai points it out, all the ninja act like they never made this bet. But interestingly, in the 2011 short, The Flight of the Dragon Ninja, Cole also wins a dragon race and wins a bet that all the ninja had, but they still act like it never happened. Now this just leads to an interesting idea that all the ninja don't actually stand by their bets, and to be honest, episode 8 is the last instance where we particularly hear about this, but honestly it's a fun little detail that they didn't need to keep in, so that's the fact for episode 8. But episode 9 gives us a fact that regards the nunchucks of lightning, and honestly this is really fascinating to me. In the scene where Cole takes all of the ninja's weapons and puts it into a briefcase to hide them, when Jay puts his nunchucks into the briefcase, you will see that the nunchucks deactivate. And what do I mean by this? The lightning that holds together the two sides of the nunchucks become just a standard metal chain, and not even a golden chain at that. So there's this implication that the nunchucks of lightning can turn off almost in the right scenario. And as far as I'm aware, this is the only instance where this actually happens, because after the golden weapons were destroyed and reforged, any instance of no lightning between the two handles of the nunchucks are represented by having nothing. So this is the only time we get to see the nunchucks in this type of design. So honestly, it's fairly fascinating. But I'm going to be honest, I prefer what they do nowadays, where if the lightning between them is deactivated, they become two separate pieces, because it shows the representation of lightning holding it together. So honestly, it's better, but this little instance was fun to note. Episode 10, considering that it is the reveal of Lloyd being the Green Ninja, you would expect it to have some interesting facts, but it actually doesn't, which is fairly interesting. So I'm just going to point out that the Green Ninja originally wasn't the title of this episode, and it was originally called Sleeping with the Enemy. This is of course referring to the fact that Garmadon is aboard the bounty for this episode, and honestly it's a fine episode title at that. But personally, I do prefer the fact that the episode's called The Green Ninja, because it is a better reveal. The only thing I'll hold against the episode being called The Green Ninja is that it gave away fairly straight away that we were going to figure out who the Green Ninja actually was. But honestly, I do still prefer it over Sleeping with the Enemy. But that's all there really was for this episode, so there you go. Episode 11 is similar to episode 2 in a lot of ways, where the main thing that came out of this episode is the fact that it introduced something fairly major to the show. This being that this is the first official outing of Vengestone, and honestly considering how minor of a point it was in this episode, it becomes such a major thing later on. So it's interesting to look back and see such a small thing become something so big. But honestly, you could still make the point of why did the ninja need Vengestone at this point. I understand that they had their golden weapons and their true potential at this point, but they wouldn't be able to tap into their elements without the weapons in hand. So honestly, it's a bit of overkill, but I understand why the Serpentine did it. But yeah, this is the first official look at Vengestone in the show, and honestly, I don't think it gets mentioned until much later on, where it becomes more prevalent after the ninja get their powers. But yeah, this is Vengestone right there, and that was the fact for this episode, so there it is. I don't know, season 1 was very weird for facts. But we are on to episode 12, and this is the first of the final 2-parter for the season. And in relation to the fact that it's the first part, it is the only episode that is a 1 of 2-parter that has the to be continued text at the end. Strangely enough, considering that we do have a fair share of 2-parters in the show, yeah, this is the only one that has a to be continued, and it's also the only episode that we have that doesn't have some sort of music for the end credits. This episode actually ends with a bit of an ominous heartbeat to it, and it really is a cool way to end a 2-parter. Honestly, much better than how they ended with Cursewell Part 1. But yeah, this is the only instance of a Ninjago episode having much more of a darker and mysterious ending, and I'm surprised to learn this now while researching the video. But yeah, this is the only time. But this does bring us to the final fact for the episode, and honestly, I do think this one is a very fun one. This being that the position that the Great Devourer was in when it was destroyed by Garmadon is a reference itself to Ouroboros. Now you may be thinking I'm referencing the lost city of Ouroboros, but no, I'm actually referencing Ouroboros itself as a reference to the real world, because it means a serpent eating its own tail. And how did it end up during this episode? In a large circle by the ninja, eating its own tail so it stay in a position. So honestly, that's such a fun little come around and finale to this season, and a finale to this episode overall. But that are the facts for this episode, and that is me covering season 1, and I do hope you enjoyed, and also let me know if you knew these facts or not. For me, I did know a handful of them, but there are a lot here that I did not know before, and this does just make me look forward to the future of this series, and let me know if you're looking forward to me covering season 2. But like I said guys, that about does it for today, and I thank you guys for watching once again. Take care, okay,